Giyu Tomioka versus just about anyone in the series of Demon Slayer is always an interesting discussion, but one matchup I think that's particularly interesting and overlooked is a hypothetical death match against the Serpent Pillar Obanai and Giyu. Obanai is pretty misunderstood due to a lot of his feats seemingly being inconsistent and him showing up pretty late in the story, but the deeper you dive, the more of a concrete placement I think you can find for him. To start off, I think Giyu is pretty self-explanatory, as with his mark he's a blatant rival to Compass Akaza. They're shown engaging in mutual strikes with one another, and Giyu can physically clash with Akaza's strikes without getting guard broken. They're pretty cut and dry relative, with Akaza having the advantage because of his demonic constitution that gives him an edge versus any human combatant that will eventually tire out and fatigue. The only place where the scaling gets called into question is whether or not Giyu gets stronger after the fight with Akaza, and I think we can definitively conclude that he does not get stronger. To explain why, I have to start with a few debunks, the first being Mitsuri's statement in the Swordsmith Village arc. In chapter 101, Mitsuri tells Tanjiro that he is significantly stronger than he was before because he survived a battle with an upper moon. This statement has some localization issues that remove the actual meaning of Mitsuri's words here, as I got the original Japanese scans precisely translated through OpenAI's 4.0 software, which makes it clear that Mitsuri says that the experience gain is immeasurable, not more valuable than anything. She additionally says 10 years of training, meaning she's not even sure of how to compare it. These two translation or localization errors make Mitsuri's statement seem a lot more literal in the English manga, but the more precise translation implies she's simply just using hyperbolic language of immeasurable and uses the experience growth point to not power scale Tanjiro necessarily, but to further show how important experience is with something tangible that Tanjiro can understand. In her opinion, she says Tanjiro is a lot stronger than before, and this is simply just because she values experience a lot. Keep in mind she has no idea how strong Tanjiro is at this point. She also has no idea how much Tanjiro even participated in the battle against Upper 6, and Mitsuri at this point doesn't even know how strong an upper rank demon is since she hasn't fought one. So with all the surrounding context, it makes much more sense that Mitsuri is just using hyperbolic language to convey that experience is very important to become a strong demon slayer in her own opinion, not that battling an upper rank demon makes you 5 years stronger, which doesn't really make any sense, especially given the extra detail that on average it takes someone 5 years to become a Hashira, which is noted in the bonus panels of the volume release of the manga. So if Tanjiro got 5 years of experience, he should at least be Hashira level immediately. According to this statement, the narrator implies he's weaker than the Hashira in just about every aspect except movement. And this, very importantly, is after he goes through a training arc and unlocks precognition. Keep in mind, Mitsuri's statement is before this happens, and after this training, Tanjiro is still pretty much implied to be weaker than Hashira. So this is obviously a hyperbolic statement by Mitsuri, and isn't necessarily a power scale of Tanjiro's ability. Obviously, this would apply to Giyu as well, meaning that after his fight with Akaza, he doesn't get like 5 years stronger, which doesn't even really make sense. The next point of contention that people have is that Giyu supposedly shows massively superior feats post-Akaza fight. One main point for this stance is Giyu's performance against the second drug Muzan that shows up towards the back end of the Infinity Castle. Giyu and Tanjiro pull up on Muzan in one of his more prime states, as the drugs acting on him haven't started really taking severe effects yet. When the two engage Muzan, Tanjiro notes that Muzans are too fast to smell and he can't follow him with his eyes. We know at the very least Tanjiro can smell Akaza's bloodlusted strikes. As we're shown, he uses this ability to locate Akaza coming from behind him, and we know he can at least see Akaza's blood demon arts as he reacts to him and combats him consistently, albeit with a bit of difficulty. If Muzan's whips are fast enough to the point where Tanjiro can't track him, This logically should mean Muzan, bare minimum, is faster than Akaza by at least a bit. Now, I think it's a bit unlikely that it's a blitz tier level of speed, as Muzan still can't consistently blitz Tanjiro here, with Tanjiro even somewhat reacting at a distance, pushing Giyu out of the way of an attack, and running around solo for a bit. And if Muzan was so much faster than Akaza by like a blitz tier, he shouldn't have this much difficulty just hitting Tanjiro, but he's only really able to do so when Tanjiro rushes in close. So Muzan, even though he's faster than Akaza, shouldn't be so much faster that he's like a blitz tier higher. It's more likely that it's just an outpaced tier. Giyu is able to perceive this Muzan's attacks and avoid them with travel speed, which isn't all that impressive, but more importantly, he's able to use Dead Calm to block some of Muzan's whip attacks. What I think gets lost in translation here is Giyu, similar to Afterglow, isn't able to completely block Muzan's attack and actually gets struck despite his use of Dead Calm causing him to bleed. In the instances before this, we see Giyu with no blood on his jacket on his left side, and in the first interaction between Giyu and Muzan clashing, that being Dead Calm, he's now shown being damaged on his shoulder, covered in blood on his left side. I also want to make it clear, just because Muzan is faster than Akaza by a bit doesn't mean this is an upscale for Giyu, as Akaza's strongest attack, Afterglow, was already able to be blocked by a massively weakened Giyu with Dead Calm. Giyu was so fatigued at this point that he couldn't even react to a baseline Akaza punch literally moments before this. So obviously a hypothetical full power Giyu's Dead Calm should be even faster and stronger than what he showed us against Afterglow. So it stands to reason that a fresher Mark Giyu's Dead Calm is just faster than Akaza's max power. Nothing inconsistent about this, and nothing to imply Giyu is stronger randomly, even though he's been damaged and fatigued. Not to mention, it doesn't even make sense that he would randomly get a lot stronger and faster. And this speed feat alone should show that even though Giyu's fatigued here, he's pretty close to his prime Mark state rather than his base form. The other point frequently cited about Giyu getting stronger is the instance when Muzan takes out all the Hashira with a large AoE attack. A lot of people are very quick to say Muzan blitzes all the Hashira here, and I want to make it very clear that this is not a blitz, and this attack is actually just a large area of effect. We see for multiple chapters before this that Muzan can't even land a single strike on the Hashira, and all the Hashira defended against him consistently. When Muzan launches this attack, we see the ground has a large crater in it, and even though we don't get to see what Muzan does in panel, we have an idea of what this attack might be from something that happens later in the fight. In chapter 195, a scene nearly identical to this plays out. Muzan does the same crater creating move by slamming the ground so hard it sends massive amounts of debris into his opponents, which at the time were Obanai and Tanjiro. Despite Obanai and Tanjiro clearly reacting to this attack on panel, they are both hit by it because they can't defend against the massive amount of area that the attack covers. This is more than likely what Muzan used to incapacitate all the Hashira, as it creates a crater, can be reacted to, and still cause damage, and is consistent with how slow Muzan was at the time of his attack that took out all the Hashira. Inosuke cites that Gyome and Giyu defended him during this attack. People then conclude, well, the other Hashira didn't react to this attack, so Giyu is faster than all the Hashira. As I mentioned, this isn't even a speed-based attack, and Inosuke's statement kinda just implies that he was at least able to perceive it, which also works in the interpretation that this is just a large AoE, not really speed-based. Inosuke's statement also doesn't mean anything for the other Hashira. We have no idea where they were in relation to the attack, and it does not mean that they didn't react on their own. In fact, Inosuke's statement has literally no correlation to the other Hashira. They could have reacted off panel, and we have no idea. That leaves us with nothing to talk about except how Obanai compares to Giyu. There's a very blatant instance to measure Obanai's speed in comparison to Giyu's. Shortly after Giyu and Tanjiro confront Muzan, we see Muzan go into a telepathic mode where he is seemingly unaware of his surroundings. When he initiates this, both Obanai and Giyu lunge at Muzan at the same time. We see them lunging and then striking on par with one another, with the fanbook just confirming this is exactly what happened. direction. This reliably should put base form Obanai's speed slightly below Mark Giyu. As I mentioned, Giyu is somewhat fatigued from his battle with Akaza, but he's still extremely fast and strong given what he was able to do with Dead Calm, defending from Muzan's attack and only taking a little bit of damage. I know the knee-jerk reaction is going to be that Obanai just can't be this fast because he can't blitz Nakime, or the complete opposite direction where he should be way faster because he quote-unquote blitzes Muzan multiple times. To cover some of the Muzan stuff, none of it is really any more impressive than the feat he shows comparing to Giyu here. As I mentioned earlier, the most prime form of Muzan is still only a little bit faster than Akaza, so everything after this should be just slower than Akaza, and we just have so many scenes of the Hashira either combating Muzan up close or avoiding his attacks. That show he's really just not that fast at this point, and I'm not saying he's incapable of tagging the Hashira at all, as he clearly can because they all get poisoned, but it's more so because of the quantity of attacks he can launch frequently, rather than the speed of the attacks being so great. With the only exception being in chapter 188 where Guillaume says, quote, "He's gotten even faster, it's overwhelming. I can't even get a feel for his attacks." This statement at face value makes it seem like Guillaume is saying his attacks are so fast that he's like getting overwhelmed and blitzed, but we know that's not the case because literally 3 pages later Muzan goes to attack Mitsuri and Guillaume just outspeeds Muzan. Clearly Muzan's not just a speedster at this point, as Guillaume easily outspeeds him, and Guillaume likely just means that Muzan has gotten faster from the point when he entered the battle, and he can't get a feel for his attacks because they're either very rapid or come from a variety of directions, because he does have like 10 tentacles coming out attacking in all types of ways. And yes, I know I said Muzan should be slower than Akaza at every single point past the part where he was in the castle. So why would Muzan get faster here? Well, I think a very reasonable explanation we can give is that Muzan states later on that his body was diverting power to fight the aging process, and he should have noticed when his hair didn't change back to its original color. The most reasonable explanation to me is that Muzan's body just adjusted better at this time period, so he was able to temporarily speed up until the aging process made him weaker again. So while Obanai's performance against Muzan is really good, none of it speed-wise is enough for me to say that he's in a different tier than Giyu altogether. I should also address the pretty large elephant in the room that Obanai isn't able to decapitate Nakime. And while this does look pretty damning at surface level, the more you dig into it, it's not actually bad at all. Mitsuri, before the Hashira training in her base form, was able to slightly outpace Zohakuten, and then she gets stronger with the Hashira training, and Obanai, who I've mentioned over and over is just stronger than her, still isn't able to attack faster than Nakime's reaction speed. So Nakime is just multiple tiers in reaction speed above someone like Zohakuten. So this isn't an anti-feat, just a testament to how fast Nakime's reaction speed is, being closer to someone like Akaza rather than Zohakuten. And not to mention, it's literally just Nakime's reaction speed. It's not like her combat speed scales to this. As we see when Obanai pulls up on Muzan, he has almost no scuff marks or damage compared to Mitsuri, who seems to be roughed up a bit by Nakime's attacks. So it's more so all Nakime could do is defend against Obanai with her reaction time and not even really combat him. Moving on from these speed comparisons, I want to talk about Obanai's power, as we should have a good baseline for Giyu. He's pretty easily able to combat Akaza without getting guard broken and can just clash with him consistently, so I'm mainly going to be focusing on Obanai's power here and how it would actually match up to Giyu's, as if he's significantly physically inferior to this. It could cause Obanai a lot of trouble when they clash in the fight. And I think you can make a pretty good argument that Obanai is physically superior to Mitsuri, or at the bare minimum just relative to her in strength. Mitsuri's purpose for joining the Demon Slayer Corps was to find a man stronger than her, and she loves Obanai pretty clearly, so this should mean Obanai would fit Mitsuri's criteria as being stronger than her. Now when Mitsuri makes this statement, she's talking about holistic power rather than just raw physical strength, as she says it's good for a girl to find someone to protect her, but I think her insecurity about her physical strength would mean that this should reasonably give some scope of physical power to Obanai, and at the bare minimum, he should at least be relative to Mitsuri herself in strength. It might sound jarring or weird to some people that Obanai, someone that's physically small, is stronger than Mitsuri, who's noted to be extremely powerful, but it's very easy to reason due to breathing mastery. And if you don't understand why that's important, I can link my video explaining how Demon Slayer's power system works in the pinned comment or description, as your physical physique does play a role in strength, but it can be amplified greatly due to breathing mastery. An example of this is when Tanjiro, despite being more mature and physically bigger than Muichiro, can't even get Muichiro to budge his hand earlier in the story. So it's not at all inconsistent for someone that has a higher mastery of breathing to just be physically stronger than someone that's also just bigger than them. Now, Mitsuri, even just in base, is someone noted to be a physical mutant, having 8 times the normal muscle density of a human, and just in her base form, she was able to put pressure on Zohakuten's neck, drawing a decent amount of blood from him, albeit she wasn't able to outright decapitate him. But Mitsuri does go through a training arc with the Hashira training, and Obanai is just stronger than her, or at the bare minimum should be in her ballpark. And then when you stack this with a mark, it puts him in that same ballpark in my opinion as someone like Akaza, as it's so many levels above just base Mitsuri from the Swordsmith Village arc. We also see in the panel that I mentioned earlier where Obanai is attacking with Giyu that Muzan, who is faster than Akaza, isn't physically power enough to just easily guard break base form Obanai, and this for me personally is enough to say he's in the right strength tax bracket to at least clash with Giyu and not get physically dominated. For anyone bringing up the arm wrestling ranking, I don't think it's relevant to physical power and is implied to be more about technique, as stated by Obanai himself in the volume extra. After giving context to the 45 scenes before this, what actually happens in a battle against Obanai and Giyu? I do think Obanai's speed edge along with his unpredictable attacks would give him a pretty nice advantage over Giyu, since the fanbook points out that 2 of his attacks are either difficult to evade or unpredictable. This correlates pretty well with the description of serpent breathing, saying that the strikes may be ever shifting but they're precise, insinuating that Obanai is extremely accurate and shifty, causing this unpredictability in his attacks. Unpredictability is pretty overpowered in Demon Slayer, as I've mentioned this feat 100,000 times, but Tanjiro using a unpredictable attack, as stated by the fanbook on Akaza, went from doing pretty much nothing meaningful on Akaza to slashing his neck open. And this is Tanjiro, who's slower and weaker than Akaza, so Obanai, who has a speed advantage on Giyu, could potentially do something pretty devastating. Giyu is definitely not defenseless, as he has a very overpowered ability in Dead Calm, which I think will be his best asset to nullify Obanai's assault. And I should note, in character, Giyu is extremely quick to pull out Dead Calm. He uses it for no other reason than to just aura farm on Rui. He does it the first time he sees Akaza use a powerful attack, that being Disorder, and when he senses Akaza's using another strong attack, that being Afterglow, he uses it again. When confronted with Muzan, the first thing he does is initiate Dead Calm, so Giyu is definitely not afraid to use Dead Calm almost immediately if need be, whether the opponent is strong or not, which I think will be his best protection against Obanai's attacks. I think the biggest issue in this matchup is Giyu combating Obanai when he's not using Dead Calm and landing any meaningful damage. Since, as we established, in equivalent forms, base to base or mark to mark, Obanai should have a speed edge, and Obanai should have the physical strength necessary to at least hold his ground against Giyu's power so he doesn't get guard broken. So I think Giyu's best win condition over Obanai is to run out his stamina, which Giyu has a lot of. He obviously fights Akaza, rests, and then goes and fights Muzan, gets poisoned, and returns to the fight, and is one of 2 Hashira to even survive this entire conflict. So obviously Giyu is an endurance champion, but I don't think it's to such an overwhelming degree that Obanai couldn't fight for a very extended period of time, as Obanai is also an endurance demon. Obviously he has his run-in with Nakime, fights with Muzan, and after getting taken out the battle is the first to return to help Tanjiro. He also gets poisoned and is damaged severely, and shows he's able to fight for a pretty extensive amount of time, and it's hard for me to see Giyu outlasting Obanai before Obanai puts Giyu down with an unpredictable attack, like his twin-headed reptile, which is noted to be difficult to predict and extremely difficult to evade. Giyu also has a habit of blocking with his sword hilt or blade, as he does this against Sanemi in their spar, and he does this against Akaza's blood demon art. If Giyu does decide to go this route against one of Obanai's unpredictable attacks, it could spell the end of the fight right there. I think Obanai's overall speed and offense advantage give him the win over Giyu in both their base and marked forms, and if you grant the transparent world to Obanai in addition to his mark, the match gets even more lopsided in Obanai's favor.